Hi guys, let's go watching. Just before that, subscribe and enjoy yourself.
In ancient times, two young beauties competed with each other to be the main empress of the empire. One of them, named Jarina Cardia, was very wayward. She was the daughter of the Marquis of Cardia. The other was extremely nice. Her name was Lydia Defron, and her father was the Marquis of Defron, a prominent magician who was once taken from the orphanage by the Marquis of Defron, was able to end the endless war between the girls. This guy's name was Kion. He had blonde hair and red eyes. These features in his appearance indicated that he had a blessing from the goddess. Lydia Defron was the genius magician's love. Once, for the sake of his beloved girlfriend's happiness, he resorted to killing Jarina Cardia. Kion cruelly took the life of a characteristic beauty, and her death was a real tragedy. For any novel, this could be the perfect ending, where the villainess ends up so badly. But events could have developed in such a way that Jarina Cardia could have been the main character. Then the ending would definitely be different. The young man turns to Jarina and asks what would happen if he told her that he wanted a girl. Can this story change if Jarina is Carion's mistress instead of Lydia Defron? Kion wonders if he knows everything in advance, will he be able to protect the one he will actually kill? The young magician decided to go back in time and start all over again, together with the daughter of the Marquis of Cardia. A blonde young man confesses his love to Jarina. The girl thinks about the boy's words. Can it save her from a terrible death? She asks the magician to keep everything a secret and to remember everything that happened to them in a new scenario. Jarina begs him not to abandon her and to save her from being killed at the first opportunity. The girl reminds Kion that she also saved him today, so she asks him to do the same for her. The young man looks worried because Jarina demands a promise from him that he will not leave her in trouble. The maid turns to Jarina and asks her what happened after she broke the cup. The protagonist is shown here at a young age, as a boy. He is running somewhere, looking mysterious. He probably ran so fast that he pushed a cup and broke it. The maid asks the girl if she is okay and if she is hurt. But at the same time, the second voice of the maid is angry because the lady does not understand who is really standing in front of her. The lady replies that she is fine. Jarina notes that the boy who is running away is still very young, but he is already so unsociable. The young man has doubts about whether all this is worth his attention and any action in relation to Jarina. The protagonist says that her name is Yunsina. She reminds herself of a day many years ago. On that terrible night, it snowed a lot, and there was a car accident in which she died at a very young age. She also recalls closing her eyes for the last time before she died, but she still managed to regain consciousness and open her eyes. However, Yunsina was already in a different body, the heroine of a novel she had recently read. Her name was Jarina Cardia. The young girl looked at herself carefully in the mirror. She noticed that she had changed a little. She couldn't believe what had happened to her and said it was completely impossible. She looked scared and shocked. After living in the new estate for a week, the main character had no choice but to get used to her new life and status. Everything was just like in that book. The new Jarina thinks that now she has to make sure that no one notices that she is a different person. The maid does her job and asks what outfit the lady would like to wear today. Jarina, in Yunsung's past life, scared the maid with a mysterious look. She looked completely unfriendly and thought she was a thief. The young lady did not understand what the maid, who was standing in the room with the dress, expected of her. So the frightened worker began to cry and apologize. In the book, the main character's rival was Jarina Cardia. Everyone knew her because she came from the famous Cardia family and was a famous robber. In the novel, Jarina Cardia's life is tragically cut short. She is killed by a young man named Kion. At one time, the Marquis de Defron took a little boy named Kion from an orphanage. As the maid continues to sip, the young lady tries to remember what happened to Jarina's character. She remembers that she died, but she cannot recall the circumstances under which it happened. The worker dares to tell her that the carriage is waiting downstairs. Yunsung tells her that she has to leave immediately. The girl gets into the carriage in the presence of servants. Yunsina, from her past life, is happy that she is the only one who knows the plot of the book, the events of which she is now living in a new life after the resurrection. According to the author's idea, the Marquis de Defron takes Kion to his place, but there are some circumstances. The protagonist of the present day has a plan to be the first to find Kion in the asylum. She thinks that this will give her the opportunity to save Jarina Cardia and completely change her fate and life. Returning to the incident when the cup broke, the young lady remembered that she hadn't been able to find Kion for 6 months. After all she knew about him was his red eyes and blonde hair, but she did manage to find him. He looked like a poor, scared boy. He was so wild that he hit a cup with his sudden movements when he was talking to Yun-sen. Yun-sung immediately realized that this was the man she had been looking for. He had such rare features as red eyes and blonde hair. She remembered that in the novel, he was supposed to be a great magician in the future. She takes him by the hand and convinces him to come with her in a friendly way. The heroine continues to lure the boy and promises him that if he goes with her, he will forget about hunger. At this time, the maid calls her. The girl is waiting for an answer, and the blonde boy is searching for words. He stutters and cannot formulate a sentence. Finally, he starts shouting that he doesn't believe in mercy and won't buy it. He asks the girl why she surrendered him. Yun-sung is surprised by the young man's reaction. She asks him not to be so nervous and says that she will explain everything to him. The boy still looks very scared. He is hurt by the way he is being treated, and he starts to cry. At the same time, he shouts that they want to use him as if he were a toy. The young lady keeps wondering where he gets these ideas from. She does not understand the meaning of what he has just said and asks him again. The boy tries to explain. He claims that he knows the taste of aristocrats. They like children with similar looks to his. Yun-sung wonders how he could possibly know such words. The maid who came with Yun-sung to the orphanage persuades her to leave. She doesn't understand Lady's intrusive behavior. At the same time, the other side of the worker is angry at everything. Lady asks her to leave her alone. Finally, Yun-sung agrees with the young man and lets him know that he is absolutely right in his statement. Then she explains everything to him. The lady tells him that she does not believe in mercy in this life, so of course she just wants to use him for her own purposes. Yun-sung continues to persuade him to go with her. She tells him that this year's winter in the Empire will be too harsh and cold. The boy listens attentively to the girl, who says that if he stays here, he simply will not be able to survive this winter and escape. The cunning girl plays another trump card. She offers the boy the support of the famous Cardia family and says that this is the best option because he can simply die here. But knowing all the events from the book in advance, she realizes that of course this child will not die. After all, the next fall, after the hard winter, the Marquis de Fran intends to take him to his place, as the events in the novel she had read had developed. She remembered it again. The girl touches the poor man gently to draw him to her and gain his trust. She looks closely into his eyes. Yun-sung says that he has unusual red eyes. This may indicate that he has a great talent for magic. The heroine says that she can take him out of the shelter, invest in him, and provide him with a normal life. In return, he has to rescue her when needed. He listens to her carefully, trying to digest this information. It was a calm, sunny summer day outside. A luxurious carriage was standing near the orphanage, in which the young hero's belongings were being packed. Yun-sung, pleased that she has finally managed to convince the young man, asks him if he has forgotten anything. The boy shyly hides his wounded hands when he hears the question. Did he have time to say goodbye to everyone? And then, hiding his eyes, he sadly replies that there are no people here with whom he can say goodbye for the last time. The girl pretends to be sad at these words and is very sorry that the protagonist has no friends here. The heroine's gaze falls again on the blonde boy's hands, which are red with inflammation. Her eyes even fill with tears for a moment. Yun-sina says that she understood the boy when he said that he had no one here to say goodbye to and supported him. The heroine informs him that it is time for them to leave. She asks him if he would be willing to treat the wounds on his hands when they arrive at their destination. The guy thinks. The lady then tells him to follow her in a commanding tone and turns to leave. The guy stopped and was still thinking about whether to go and what to say to her. Yun-sina was the first to enter the carriage, as the poor young man followed her uncertainly. The laborer continued to take down the things. The girl's maid came to the carriage and called her. Yun-sung asked her what she wanted from her. The worker replied that she didn't understand the young lady's actions. Why was she doing this? The heroine replied irritably that the boy was very gifted and she intended to use him. The poor boy from the shelter heard their conversation. He also overheard that he did not belong here at all. Questions arose in his mind. Yun-sina confirmed that she was going to take care of the child. The maid wondered how the girl knew whether he had any special needs or not. The worker would not stop. She insisted that she needed to get permission from the owner first, and only then take the young man. The heroine listened attentively to the disgruntled nanny, looking at her with angelic eyes, and only then turned to her. In a confident voice, the lady said that she belonged to the Cardia family, so she could do whatever she wanted in this world. Then she turned around and went up to the carriage. The worker stood motionless, unable to respond. The poor man was sitting in his seat. Either out of fright or anger, he clenched his hands into fists. The protagonist sat down across from him and literally drilled into him with her eyes. Her gaze was mysterious and cold. The hero could not stand it and asked his savior why she was looking at him so closely. As if he had suddenly realized something, he excitedly said that he was to be taken away now for rescue, as promised. He was worried that they were going to use him. The guy shouted that they were lying to him. In response, Yoon-sena became angry and asked the young man to watch his language. Suddenly, the lady noticed that the young man across from her had become a cute cat, as if the magic had finally started to work. She wondered if it was she who had such power over the boy, or if he was capable of transforming himself. The young mage appeared before her again in human flesh, with red eyes. Finally, Yoon-sung laughed and asked him his name. She instantly became so joyful and gracious that even the maid noticed. The girl realized that such sudden openness and a smiling face could play a bad joke on her. The confused guy replied that his name was Tom. Yoon-sena concluded that he had a simple, ordinary name and asked if he liked it. According to the novel, the young man did not like his own name, Kion, and Yoon-sung remembered it well. The fact is that his own mother, who did not like him at all and treated him badly, named him that way. After some thought, the boy replied that he did not like his name. Yoon-sung was satisfied with this answer, and she immediately came up with something. She asked the boy if she could now, as his guardian, give him a new name and if he even wanted it. As usual, the young magician remained silent, constantly thinking about his savior's questions and suggestions. Then the lady happily said that she knew what the boy's name would be, but the young man seemed to hear a voice from his past life. He said his name was Kion. Translated from the ancient language, it meant the victor. Finally, Yoon-sena said that from now on he would be called Reynard, or simply Ray for short. Translated from the ancient language, it meant hope. She asked if the young man agreed to this. The girl was counting on the young magician and realized that he was her only hope for salvation. The young man slowly repeated the name the lady had just offered him, syllabically. Yoon-sung was nervous. She asked him why he wasn't answering and said that maybe he didn't like this option. Then she decided to check and contacted him, calling him Tom again. The young man looked down and said in confusion that he was no longer Tom. Then he confidently said that he should now be called Reynard. Yoon-sung accepted the news with joy. With the expression of a victor, she asked that Ray take care of her wherever necessary. When she arrived home, she immediately heard a negative response to her request. The man said that he understood Yurina, the real Yoon-sena, perfectly well, but he could not allow her to do this. Yurina looked confused and even cried when she heard the reason for the refusal. The fact is that she cannot take care of a child she knows nothing about. The father repeated to his daughter why he did not allow her to let the boy live here with them. Next, Ray and a maid entered the room where only the man and his daughter were. As Ray hid behind his rescuer, the manor owner asked the maid what kind of kid they had brought. When the emotion subsided a bit, the man suggested to Yurina that he could give an order to have the young man trained as a servant. The man also added that the girl should respect the interests of the family and take them into account. Therefore, they cannot take care of a child if they do not even know about his or her special needs. Yurina knew that she might be rejected, so she prepared information that if a family takes care of a child with special needs, that family will also benefit from it. Their family, the Cardia, had already taken care of and raised a child who soon became famous and renowned. It was the knight Aaron. With such a clear example in her family, Yurina realized the importance of taking the young man to her, so she began to persuade her father again. She said that Reynard had a special gift and was a future magician. She knows that for a fact. She then nervously shouted that she had not taken him from the orphanage to turn him into a servant. The father was suspicious of his daughter's words, that the young man really had the talent to study at the Royal Krona Academy in the future. The kingdom of Krone is inferior to the empire in many respects. It is smaller in area, weaker economically, and less secure. But it has magical power like no other. Therefore, it so happened that students from different parts of the world and many empires began to come to Krone to study and practice magic. The father again began to ask Yurina how this boy with no roots and on his own could enter the academy. The man told his daughter that he respected her wish, but it was completely illogical and unreasonable. He also added with a tired look that he was tired of this conversation and that it had to end. Yurina was not satisfied. She continued to persuade her father and suggested one option. The girl realized that she could not miss this chance. So she told her father that if they couldn't come to an agreement between themselves, maybe they could find a specialist who could determine the boy's magical abilities. Later, she added with a laugh that even if Renard's talent for magic was not found, she would not abandon him. The father finally agreed to the girl's persuasion and said that he would send a letter to Dave today. The man also suggested that Dave should be in the lab right now, so they could have it in the afternoon. Urena was very pleased with her father's kindness, so she began to thank him joyfully. When she left, my father began to doubt whether he was being too kind to her. She was walking down the corridor with her maid when another worker came up to them and told them that they were having some problems. The young lady asked worriedly what was wrong. The maid said that it was about Mr. Reynard. Jurena's eyes rounded in surprise and asked again. At this time, they all heard some dishes fall to the floor and clink. The young magician shouted that no one should come near him. The girl and the workers were frightened, so they stood there and did not move. They watched the boy's strange behavior. Reynard stood in a position as if he was defending himself against an attacker. At the same time, he continued to scream hysterically not to be touched. Urena asked him if someone had hit him. The two maids next to him had very different opinions about what was happening. Finally realizing what had happened, the lady turned to the young man in frustration and said that she had only asked him to take a bath. The young man finally calmed down and listened attentively to his savior. Urena asked him to stay calm and not to worry. She said that no one would hurt him in this estate. Reynard objected and said that he had been hurt and pointed to the maids behind Urena's back. The lady looked at the workers with suspicion, who stopped whispering to each other and shook their heads. Then she told Reynard that they hadn't done anything like that, but he didn't want to retract his words. The young man crossed his arms again, as if to defend himself, and began to shout that they were trying to undress him, but he was just a child. Shocked, Urena shouted at the boy to stop talking nonsense. The frightened maids were beginning to cry. The young lady grabbed the boy and began to calm him down. She explained that they had come on purpose to help him wash. Reynard was very surprised to hear that they just wanted to wash him because they poured hot water into the bathtub. Finally, Urena realized why he had such a reaction to bathing procedures and asked if he had never bathed at all. The young man did not give up. He kept asking questions. He was worried about the fact that two adult women wanted to deliberately undress him. The girl was already angrily repeating that they just wanted to wash him. But Ray insisted that he was not a child anymore and could handle it himself. Urena explained that it was just their job, but the young man was very nervous and said that he had the arms and legs to take care of himself. The point was, in his opinion, that they were just molesting him. The poor lady could not understand anything, so she just kept silent. She had no choice but to end the dispute and told the workers that they were free to leave. Ray didn't like the fact that she had just let his abusers go. He suspected that she was just covering for them in this way. Urena said she would explain everything to him only after he went to the bathroom. She told him to wash himself instantly if he refused the maid's help. After all, she would also be leaving. But the boy was worried that someone might come in while he was washing himself. He did not trust the young lady's words. Urena went on to say that there was something she didn't want to tell him in order not to offend him. She had no choice but to admit that Reynard smelled bad. Ray did not expect to hear this at all. He froze in place. Looking a little embarrassed, Urena summarized all of the above. She said that she would leave now, but that he had to wash himself thoroughly. Then she saw how dramatically Reynard changed. She realized that he was about to do something terrible. But soon, he became a defenseless little boy again, and Urena turned to him in a friendly way. The girl assured him that no one would harm him in this estate. She swore on the honorable name of Urena Cartia. Then she turned to the exit and said that they would definitely see each other later. However, Ray did not give up easily. He asked why he should believe her. Urena Cartia realized that he would not back down easily. She wondered how else she could convince him. The girl said that he had already trusted her for the first time when he agreed to leave the shelter with her. She asked him why he believed her then, and now he was questioning everything she said. Ray had something to say, but he got so excited that he couldn't formulate his thoughts. Urena was furious because she did not understand what was so difficult about her question and why he was silent. She demanded an answer. Finally, the young man agreed and said he believed her. To be honest, Urena didn't expect such a quick agreement from the stubborn kid, so she was a little confused. After such a long and difficult persuasion, Reynard finally got into the bathroom. He was just wondering how the water in the bathroom could be so warm when Urena ran into the room and warned him about something. She just wanted to tell him where she had put his clean clothes. Ray was embarrassed and furious. She asked me to put on clean clothes after bathing and said she was leaving. Ray covered his eyes with his hands in despair. He was also very ashamed to be seen naked. He did not understand how the lady could come in so quietly and without even knocking. But in the end, he was able to control himself and instantly turned into a cute cat. He decided that he needed to forget this unfortunate incident. When Urena went into the bathroom, the boyfriend noticed that she was defiantly covering her nose. He wondered if it was really an unpleasant odor coming from him. He sniffed himself and concluded that he did smell, but he thought it was just a rich man's whim. Reynard always thought that absolutely everyone on Earth had a similar smell. He remembered the shelter and how everyone there smelled the same. So for him, it was a common story. Lying quietly in the bathtub in the hot water, he thought about his past life in the orphanage. He had no friends there because no one liked his special red eyes. People around him were afraid to even look at him. The other children hated him and constantly bullied him. They said he was cursed. He also recalled his father, who sometimes beat him because of his red eyes. Ray realized that it was painful and unpleasant for him to remember the past, so he pushed these thoughts away. He noticed the colored soap. He thought it was very beautiful and unusual, and he noted that it was the first time he had ever seen anything like it. The young man doubted whether he could use it, because it was a soap for aristocrats. After spinning it in his hands, he noticed that this is exactly how Jarina Cardia smells. Then the young lady examined the hands of the clean boy. She said that the wounds on his palms were not deep. The two maids who were also present in the living room offered to examine him on their own and bring a first aid kit. Urena asked to leave them and said she would do everything herself. When she noticed Ray sitting there staring at her, she asked him what he was looking at. Embarrassed, Reynard said he wasn't looking. The girl instantly brightened up and asked if he wasn't really staring at her. Jarina Cardia remembered that she, as the mistress of the estate, had to be well-mannered, so she told Reynard to let her know if anything bothered him. The heroine thought that clothes are really the wings of a person. After all, beautiful clothes can decorate anyone. Reynard came into the living room dressed in clean clothes. He himself was surprised by his new, unusual look. The lady admired him and was pleased with his work. He looked like a real aristocrat. The young magician was shifting from foot to foot with excitement. Urena said that he looked great and asked if he had done all the work. Then she moved closer to him and began to sniff him almost imperceptibly. Renard noticed and asked if he smelled good now. Urena made a sly face. She mentally noted that the smell of him was now satisfactory, but did not say it out loud. Instead, the girl said that now he smelled like a normal person. And the young man asked her about the soap he used to wash with. He cautiously asked her if this was the kind of soap she used too. The lady looked confused. She asked to clarify what kind of soap she was talking about. The young guest was not happy that he had started this conversation, but he did answer that the soap was round and yellow. Urena said with an indifferent face that she probably used it too. Not understanding why he was so confused by this soap, she suggested that it might have too sweet a scent, so she offered to replace it. Reynard refused and said that was not the case. He then asked the young owner if she was the only one who usually used it. Urena nodded affirmatively. She didn't understand why he was conducting this ridiculous interrogation about what she washed with. She was already tired of this conversation, so she started to call for a worker to replace the damn soap. Ray rushed to ask her not to do it. The girl calmed down and waited for an explanation from the strange-looking young man. Reynard was finally able to explain that he liked the smell and wanted to use it too. Urena looked furious, but agreed with him. The young man stood meekly in front of him and could not even move in shock. After so many events and a long conversation, it was finally time for lunch. Urena noticed that the guest didn't even know how to hold the cutlery correctly, so she came up with the idea that maybe she should hire a tutor for him. Looking closely at his eating habits at the table, she determined that there was still a lot of work to be done with him. After a delicious meal, Reynard plopped down on a soft sofa with pleasure and compared this state to paradise. He said he was ready to die in such conditions right now. Urena, who came into the room at that moment, forbade him to even think about it and said that he would be breaking the contract. Ray quickly got up from the couch and asked what kind of contract they were talking about. Jarina shouted in displeasure that she had already told him. She went on to clarify the details of the agreement, which were that she had saved him now, and he would also help her in due course. The conversation between the young people began to get heated. Ray shouted what she could do to him if he did not want to save her. The girl said she would not force him to do it. At the same time, she added that she did not want to tell him about it, but she had to. She doesn't understand what is the benefit of her doing it if she gets nothing in return. The young man cried out in despair, but did not argue. Urena mentally called the guy a fool. After all, judging by his reaction to her words, he understood and accepted everything. The lady said that they had no right to terminate the unilateral contract. The girl noted to herself that no matter how he showed his character, he was still a child. At this point, Reynard decided to ask about his talent for magic. He said he knew that magic was a very serious matter. He tried to understand what could connect him to such a complex science. Reynard wondered how he could become a great magician if he was born into an ordinary family and his parents had no unusual features. The thought occurred to him that he might not be his own son, but he did not say it out loud. Urena hastened to reassure him. She said that a person gets a talent for magic at birth. Parents have nothing to do with it. Seeing the confused kid sitting in front of her, she tried to explain. She gave an example of when it happens that parents are magicians and an ordinary child is born to them, and sometimes it happens the other way around. Reynard was very surprised that this could happen. The guest said that he did not yet understand whether he had a talent for magic or not. He asked how she could be so sure. This made him think that maybe she was a witch too. Urena said that she was a completely ordinary person. The guy was confused and stopped understanding anything at all. To put an end to these suspicions and meaningless conversation, the lady confidently said that she knew for sure that he would become an outstanding magician. She tried to clarify what she meant. The girl said that his unusual red eyes gave her such confidence in his future. Reynard was not entirely satisfied with this explanation. As always, worried, he said that everyone around him said that he had been cursed by some goddess. That's how everyone, and he himself, explained his red eyes, which were different from everyone else's. Urena came closer and tried to calm the poor man down, saying that this feature was a blessing, not a curse. But Reynard had doubts about everything the girl said. He worried what would happen to him if it became clear that he had no talent for magic. At the moment of their frank conversation, I heard some footsteps in the corridor. Ray was very worried that he might be sent to an orphanage again, and he asked Urena about it. Finally, the footsteps became closer, and a man entered the living room. He greeted the lady with a happy greeting. The boy turned into a cat again in fright, and Urena did not realize who was standing in front of her. The man who had just walked in looked very handsome and entertaining. He seemed to seduce the audience with his gaze. Urena felt very embarrassed, but still managed to ask if he was Dave. Reynard was also very excited when he saw the stranger. The lady tried to calm him down and asked him not to be so nervous. Urena's father came into the living room with her husband and introduced Dave to them. He offered to test the boy for witchcraft. Dave looked confident and looked at Ray with a smile on his face. Ray, on the contrary, looked at the guest warily and distrustfully. Dave kissed the lady's hand as a sign of attention and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Urena looked embarrassed and confirmed that their last meeting had indeed been a long time ago. To ease the tension, she got straight to the point. The lady pointed to Ray and told him that she would like to test him for special abilities. Urena introduced the boy with red eyes, saying his name was Reynard. The man, who was almost 2 heads taller than the boy, studied him carefully. He has already made some assumptions about the guy. Instead, he said that he would immediately begin to test Reynard's magical abilities. The first thing Dave did was to take the guy's hand and start checking his pulse. Instantly, some strange processes began to take place, which Ray, to his regret, had no control over. Dave looked like a true professional. He even closed his eyes for a more thorough inspection. Urena was standing nearby and also took part in the magical processes around her. Finally, she asked Dave what he had to say. Quite unexpectedly for everyone, the man drew the boy to him and asked the lady to give Reynard to him. Urena was not at all surprised by the reaction of the man who was checking her boy, but she sternly objected and recommended that he find another student. But Dave didn't give up and asked the girl to think about his offer again. She refused again. A real battle for the gifted child began. The girl resolutely said that she intended to send the gifted boy to study at the Crown Academy. Dave continued to persuade. He boasted that he could teach the boy much better in the science of magic. The man added that he had also graduated from the academy, but had better knowledge than the local professors. Urena believed him, but disagreed and again rebuffed him categorically. Calm Dave lost his footing. He did not understand why he was not trusted. The man started shouting that he had the best grades at the academy, and now there was a whole line to get into his class. The heroine is upset that she did not foresee this development in advance, but she can't be wrong. After all, according to the plot of the novel she read in her past life, Kion studied at the Crown Academy. Urena realized that if Ray studied with Dave, he would also gain good knowledge, but this contradicted her previously thought-out plan. The girl was sure that studying at the academy would enable the boy to develop the capabilities that could later shake up the entire empire. She was also worried that if he did not enter the academy, he would not be able to protect her from the Marquis de Fron in the future. A disappointed Dave said that he had run out of arguments to persuade him, so he agreed with the lady's decision. But he asks to work with the boy before he leaves for the academy. Urena felt like a winner and the owner of the boy. She said she didn't mind them studying together, but she also had a purpose in asking him to do so. The cunning girl knew that there was another equally important reason why she wanted to send him to the academy. And it was her rival, the beautiful Lydia Defron. The heroine had to do everything possible to prevent Reynard and Lydia from meeting. After all, she remembered that this is how the events unfolded in the book. Finally, his father reappeared. He asked Dave if he had the talent to study at the Cron Academy. He replied that it would not be a problem for him to enroll. Moreover, the dean of the academy himself would come and persuade him to become their student. But he also added that it seemed strange to him that he was unable to catch the wave of mana from him. According to him, the problem was that Reynard, without realizing it, was storing mana in his body. Dave continued to explain to his father. The thing is, even an experienced magician would have a hard time keeping all the mana inside him. And this kid had a lot of mana, so I wonder how he hid it so skillfully. After analyzing everything, the man asked his host in disbelief where they had found Reynard. Urena was surprised by this discovery. She said that she had taken him from Baron Genon's orphanage. Dave began to get nervous. He asked about Baron Genon, whether he was the gentleman who seemed to be a very unintelligent person and only knew how to bluff in this life. The girl noted that the man did not choose his words when he was angry. The guest was still concerned about how she knew that the boy had such a talent. That's what he asked. Urena understood his suspicions. After all, her character was only 11 years old. Of course, anyone would have questions about how such a young girl was able to discover the superpowers of another child on her own. But she can't reveal the truth, which is that in his past life, Reynard was a great magician and later killed her himself. This is only the plot of the novel she read, so she decides to keep quiet and behave as a girl of her age should. Putting on an angelic face, Urena tells Dave that she will tell him everything. She began by saying that she has been visiting various shelters lately, and in one village she was told an interesting legend. According to her, the legend said that a child with red eyes received the blessing of a goddess. She asked if it was true that the chief magician, William, also had red eyes. Ray did not understand what she was talking about. Urena was so confident about it that Dave couldn't deny her and believed her about William's red eyes. Although it was not true. Playing the role of a naive girl, the heroine admitted that she did not immediately believe in this legend and even laughed at it. But after a while, she met Reynard. Urena asked Dave if he thought it was all unreal too. Little Ray wondered what was going on here. Of the people present, only Urena knew the real truth. She realized that even in the book, no one knew what the red eyes meant, only Kion himself. So nothing would change now, she thought. She had no choice but to wish that they would just believe her. She mentally begged Dave to believe this nonsense and stop asking uncomfortable questions. Urena seems to have managed to convince him. The man looked satisfied. Dave knelt down in front of the girl and said with a sly look that he thought she was so mature, but she wasn't. Urena was furious at this statement. She said that she was not a child anymore. After that, the visitor said that he had to leave, because he still had to write a letter of recommendation for the academy. The girl was pleasantly surprised, and asked if he was really going to write such a letter about Ray. Dave replied that he was just doing his job, and also expressed sadness that Reynard could not become his student. He turned to the young man and told him that he was actually blessed by the goddess. He wished him good luck at the academy. Urena was very pleased that she had succeeded. She shouted happily to her father. The heroine repeated that Ray really has magical powers and asked if they could take custody of him now. Of course, her father was not happy about this decision, but he said that he did not mind and that she could do as she pleased. The daughter thanked her father sweetly for his favor. Urena analyzed the outcome of the events and noted that so far everything was going according to plan. One dark night, a man in a cloak approached the prince and asked His Highness if he had really been called. The young dark-haired man, who was the prince, nodded affirmatively. He went on to say that he had learned that some people don't like him. He added intriguingly, should they prepare to leave? At the same time, two men were holding secret talks in one of the rooms. One of them asked the visitor to do everything quietly and without mistakes, because it was very important. The other replied that he had taken note. The visitor, who was hiding his face, carefully examined Urina's personal file and promised the owner that they would do everything he asked. The heroine and Reynard were finally alone, but the girl closed the door to the living room. She thought to herself that half the work was done. All that remained was to persuade the Marquis. The girl turned to the boy and asked him if he finally realized that she would not send him back to the shelter. Ray did not understand the question. When it finally dawned on him, he thanked the lady for her kindness. But he did so very reluctantly. Urina was amused by the expression on the boy's face. She laughed inwardly and noted that it was not easy for her to pretend to be a thief. She went on to say that now they needed to go to the room, but she was still concerned about Ray's face, so she asked what was wrong. Reynard quoted Urina as saying that she was no longer a child. That's how she answered Dave. The kid had a sly look on his face. The lady blushed and was embarrassed by how Reynard had accurately picked up on her tone of voice then. Urina jokingly reprimanded him for his words. It was a sunny, warm morning at the estate. Urina got dressed to go into town. Ray asked her if she was sure she was going. She confirmed. She hurried to calm the agitated boy down and told him that she would be back soon and that he should wait for her here. Two maids, who were also standing nearby, offered to go instead, but she refused. Urina said that she was going to buy clothes for Ray and also wanted to choose a gift for her mother. Ray stood next to her with a pale face. She turned to leave and shouted to the kid that she would be back very soon. While the heroine was riding in a carriage to the city, she had many thoughts about the Marquis of Cartia in her head. The last time she saw her was about 6 months ago, but she remembers her as a gentle and kind woman. Urina compared her to an iris flower because the Marquise was so elegant and beautiful. The heroine also recalls that the Marquise was always polite and attentive, not only to her family, but also to her maids, which is not typical of the aristocracy. But if she saw disrespect on the part of the children, Urina continued to recall, she would scold them severely for it, so she was very worried about whether she would accept Reynard and what would happen if she didn't let him leave. After all, it could harm her plans. Finally, the carriage arrived at the town square, where it was very crowded and noisy because a fair was taking place. The young assistant had never seen anything like it and was delighted to see so many people here. Urina mentally noted that the assistant was too easy to surprise and wished she had looked harder for a gift. The nanny lost her head from all the variety around her and asked the lady to go everywhere. The lady, in turn, warned Betty that they would only visit the right stores. Betty began to persuade Urina. She said that they hadn't had a vacation in so long, because the lady had a lot to do. The girl agreed with the nanny and her eyes lit up. She was going to find a suitable gift for her mother, so they approached a tent with different colored fabrics. Betty saw that the girl looked a little lost in the crowd, so she suggested that they go inside the store. The girl replied that she was fine. Urina said she was interested in looking at people. There was such a buzz around. She also asked the nanny not to follow her and to leave her alone. She assured me that she was comfortable here. Urina was busy thinking about what would be the best gift for the Marquis and how to start this conversation. Was she worried about whether she would accept Ray? Tired of these experiences, she forced herself to stop guessing. Betty showed the item on the shelf and asked if she liked it. Then she showed me a yellow handkerchief. Urina approved the choice. The nanny said she was sure the Marquis would like it. The girl tried to smile, because she promised to have a good time here. Then she noticed a detail on the handkerchief. Urina said that she looked closely at the bottom of the product. There was a picture of a cute cat on a handkerchief next to the pattern, and she showed it to Betty. Laughing, the lady asked if the nanny thought the cat looked so much like Reynard. The assistant didn't immediately understand and asked again. Urina showed her the drawing again, and she agreed with her. Betty was very happy that the lady finally started laughing and her mood improved. She expressed her hope that this would happen more often now. The nanny frankly admitted to the girl that they had all been worried about her lately because she was growing up so fast. She also recalled that Urina used to cry a lot before, and she used to calm her down. The assistant decided to show the girl her devotion. She started to say that if Urina needed any help, she would be there. But then something unexpected happened. A man with his face covered ran up to them. He was approaching Urina, but Betty quickly oriented herself and covered her. Footsteps were heard in the square. Someone was heading straight for them. It was a dark-haired young man, a prince. He turned to the attacker and asked him how he dared to aim at him. The masked man replied that he did not understand what was being demanded of him, because they did not even know each other. Urina could not move from fright. The furious prince said he was not interested in his ridiculous excuses. Then they saw the stranger pull out a dagger. The prince cursed loudly. The lady was also angry and came forward to hurt the attacker. Her assistant started screaming in terror to warn and save Yurina. The prince quickly flew to the young girl and knocked the dagger out of the attacker's hands. Everyone heard the metal clattering to the ground. There was a real commotion and fight in the middle of the square. The masked and hooded stranger shouted at the prince to mind his own business. It was clear that things had not gone according to plan. His Highness looked at the brazen attacker with disdain and suspicion. At this point, Yurina began to suspect something was wrong. The situation seemed strange to her, and she wondered who could have caused such a commotion right in the center of the city. Then the prince took possession of a dagger and rushed at the stranger enemy. He struck the masked man, and he fell to the ground. The weak girl could not withstand such nervous tension, pushed the young man away, and also fell to the ground. The prince, with a proud look of victory, turned to the frightened young lady. Betty ran up to Yurina and started calling for help. The girl replied that she was fine. His Highness also asked the young man if he had been injured. Then the events are moved from a crowded square to a safe, closed street. The winner of the battle, the nanny and the young lady, stood around the corner. The man apologized to the girls if he might have frightened them. Yurina politely objected and thanked him. She said that he was the reason they were okay. The prince replied that he was glad that everything ended so well. The frightened assistant turned to the lady and asked if she had had enough adventures for the day and should go home. The girl replied that everything was fine and that she still needed to pick up one thing. The nanny offered to run and get everything herself. Meanwhile, she asked the prince to stay and guard the lady. The dark-haired young man replied that it would not be a problem for him at all. But when they were alone, he added that the girl's assistant was quite enthusiastic. Yurina felt guilty and suggested that she was causing a lot of problems for the young man. His Highness made it clear that everything was fine and asked why she had tried to stop him in the recent scuffle. Yurina responded by thanking her savior once again, but admitted that she was worried about the situation because the prince had brought everything to bloodshed. She added that soldiers would soon arrive there very obviously, because people around them would start screaming. Yurina tried to explain. The fact is that it was a fairly crowded place, and a real panic could have started there. In her opinion, this could have resulted in many people suffering. The prince said he liked her thoughts. The girl said that she might have been a little harsh in conveying this to him, but asked him to think of her as just a child. Suddenly, something seemed strange to her. The prince tactfully replied that it was actually a good point. At that moment, Yurina was thinking that they might know each other, and it made her uncomfortable. With nothing at hand, she tore a piece of cloth from her dress and bandaged her rescuer's wounded arm. The lady excitedly said that now the blood was coming through the bandage, but the wound was not too deep, and that was good. But she also warned the young man, who had not even changed his face, that he should be vigilant, because the wound could start to fester. The prince looked embarrassed and asked if she was sorry for the fabric. Yurina told him how it was possible to value something more than a person's life. The young man said that she was quite an interesting person. They were still sitting on the ground around the corner. Yurina realized that she was beginning to feel embarrassed by this conversation, so she asked the man if he had to leave, as he had some business of his own. She addressed him as a young master. The young man asked in surprise if she had really used the expression, "young sir?" The girl did not understand. He repeated this expression again with a mockery, and the lady nervously asked him why he was so surprised. The man went on to say that now he understood why she had been so free with him. He assumed that she had not understood anything at all. Yurina apologized if she had been tactless. But did she really not understand what was going on and who he was? The dark-haired young man added that he was sorry that it had happened because she had stood up for him. Yurina looked up at him with her childlike eyes and asked him what he meant. But suddenly she heard a scream. The masked attacker was standing behind her with a sword in his hand and swung at her. The terrified lady was frozen with horror and surprise as she saw a sharp blade hovering over her head. This time, the prince was not confused and showed all his courage. He pushed the robber away from the girl, snatched the sword from his hands, and rushed at him with it. He later said that he was sure that he was the target of the attacker. But now he realized that both then and now the stranger wanted to harm this young man. Seeing that Yurina was not taking her eyes off her attacker, who was lying on the ground and very nervous, the young man told her not to worry because he was alive. The prince leaned over the victim and hesitated whether to take the sword out of him or not. He suggested that Yurina leave it here because the soldiers would soon come for him. The man also warned her that they should go to another safe place and asked her if she knew the address of the store. Then they saw the assistant coming back, and they both noticed that it was just in time. His Highness said they would say goodbye here. The girl was embarrassed and did not immediately manage to answer. Finally, she was able to thank him for staying with her while the nanny went to the store. The young man said that this was a common thing for him and began to unwind the bandage. Urena noticed this and reassured him that he could keep the cloth. She also explained that it was primarily for first aid, but now he definitely needs to show the wound to a doctor. The prince kindly told her that she was an extremely kind girl. Finally, he added that she was also quite sincere, not like all aristocrats. He also expressed hope that fate would bring them together again. Then he turned around, wished her all the best, and said goodbye. Urena was silent. She couldn't find the right words because she was confused. As the prince walked across the city bridge, he saw his knights and guards coming toward him. One of them turned to him and asked if he was all right. The young man asked back if they were worried about him. The older knight asked angrily why the escort hadn't been with His Highness all this time. He noticed that the prince was injured and suggested that he urgently call a doctor. The guards started calling for help. The prince replied that there was no need to worry because he had received first aid and his wound was not deep. The prince's thoughts at that time were occupied by the young beauty he had recently rescued. He regretted not even asking her name. He remembered her face and reassured himself that they would meet again. Urena came into the living room. She saw Ray and called out to him. The day before, she had asked him to leave her alone when they were at the mansion, and now she noticed that he had listened to her, but she couldn't stop thinking and kept worrying whether the Marquis of Cartia would refuse so that Renard could stay. The young man was a little embarrassed by this attitude and asked the lady if it was necessary for everyone to greet him so solemnly. Urena wondered if Ray was really a talented kid or a coward. She explained to him that if it happened that his father had officially decided to take him in, then all the proper procedures had to be followed. She added that even if he was just a simple guy, he has now become one of them, almost a family member. Another of her arguments was that he would now study magic. But Reynard asked what that had to do with anything. Urena was quick to explain again. The fact was that when a magician completes his studies and returns from the academy, he is immediately awarded a knighthood. She also reminded him that he had even received a good reference from Dave, so no one could have any doubts about him and his status. Reynard tried to understand the lady's words and thought. She touched Ray's hand gently. Jurena assured him that all these people were just hired hands that her mother had hired to serve her. They had no intention of hurting him, and if anyone did, they would be fired immediately. After that, the young mistress asked the boy to make his face more friendly. She wanted him to smile when talking to her mom. Ray was irritated by this and asked why he had to smile all the time. He decided that Marquise Cartia was an evil woman and asked Jurena about it. But the girl said that she was, on the contrary, very kind and friendly. At the same time, the lady remembered that sometimes she could be really scary. The maid opened the door and told them they could come in. The Marquis was waiting for them. The mother called her daughter by name. Urena joyfully rushed to her and began to hug her. Ray stood obediently behind her. Marquise Cartia began to ask her daughter about the journey, whether she was tired, and expressed concern that she had not rested at all and had come to her immediately. Urena said that she had missed her very much. The woman said that the young lady still needed to rest in her room, and she would have visited her. She also said that she wanted to meet her herself, but there was a lot of dust, which was dangerous for her daughter's weak health. The girl agreed with her and mentally noted that Urena was really weak. The thing is that 6 months ago, Urena got very sick when she was visiting her mother. She had a high fever. The Marquise stayed with her daughter for several days and took care of her. But even after Urena regained consciousness, she still remained heavy. She even thought for a moment that her favorite daughter had died. When the hugging was over, my mother said that my father had warned her about the boy they had taken under their care. She asked if he was with her. Urena nodded affirmatively and asked Ray to say hello. The young man greeted her hesitantly. The young lady was worried that he would be rude, but now she was convinced that he was much nicer than Dave. The Marquis of Cartia was pleased after the meeting. The young man was asked if he liked the estate. He looked at Jurena in confusion. The woman saw that the boy was a little embarrassed, so she decided to explain everything. She meant, "Is everything okay in his room? Is he comfortable there?" After all, she said, they hadn't had such small guests for a long time, so she was worried. Ray confirmed that he finally understood what we were talking about. He was afraid of such frank questions, so he answered that he liked everything very much, just to get away from them. Urena mentally noted that the atmosphere here was pleasant and friendly. She also noticed that Reynard was actually quite compliant. This is not surprising, since he is only 12 years old. The maids came into the room to help the children get settled. The Marquis suggested that the young man go to rest and told him that tomorrow he would be given a beautiful outfit. Ray agreed. When the mother and daughter were alone, Urena asked the Marquise if everything was all right. Her mother did not understand and asked again. The girl excitedly clarified that she meant Ray. But she was worried about one thing. She knew that her father had allowed her to keep the boy because he had a special gift. But why the Marquise agreed so easily, she could not yet understand. Mother asked if there were any problems with Reynard. Urena was so nervous about this question that she wrinkled her dress. She looked uncertain and tried to say that there was no problem. The Marquise of Karcha saw her daughter's strange state, hugged her, and asked why she was behaving like that. Does she think her mother will be angry with her? The girl admitted to herself that her mother's care touched her very much. The woman addressed her daughter tenderly and admitted that, as a mother, she only wanted her daughter to be healthy and happy, and that she needed nothing else. Urena recognized the guilt in herself. She felt guilty that she was not her own daughter, but was being cared for as if she were her own. The girl happily called her mother. At the same time, the young lady realized that, despite the Marquise's concern and guilt, the woman was still very much like her own mother. She missed her because it was clear that they would never see each other again. The next day, Reynard had a clothing fitting. Urena, who was also present, asked him how old he was. The boy again seemed not to hear or understand the question. With a sly face, the girl thought to herself that she actually knew his age, but decided to ask again so as not to anger the boy. In fact, she doubted whether he was 11 or 12. She began to think and count in her head. Last winter, the age difference between Kion and Lydia was 2 years. The lady continued to think logically. The fact is that Lydia is now 10 and a year younger than Urena. It's summer, and according to Urena's calculations, she hasn't had a birthday yet, so she must be 11 or 12. The young man hummed. He said he was 12 and asked if Urena was 11. She nodded affirmatively. Ray concluded that she was a year younger than he was, so she was still a child. Urena noted to herself that although he was older, he was physically no different from her. She winked at him slyly and said that there was only a year's difference between them. Reynard didn't give up and childishly continued to argue that it was a whole year, and he would grow up much faster, 2 years faster. Urena playfully countered that if there was a 1-year difference between them, why did he think I would grow up 2 years faster? The young man defiantly replied that he would soon be 13. The girl rounded her eyes in surprise and asked again. Reynard did not really believe his own words, but he confidently confirmed that he was 13 years old. The girl continued to doubt his words. She couldn't understand how he could be so old. She started counting again in her mind. It turned out that Kion was 3 years older than Lydia. This strange math made the heroine think that her memory had failed her this time. Ray could see the girl's confusion, so he asked her what was wrong. She replied that everything was fine, but she mentally noted that she hadn't even been able to remember the title of the novel before, so it was no surprise that she had forgotten the age. While the young man was being dressed, Urena continued to analyze and recall the plot of the novel. It turned out that she didn't remember Kion very well. He had blonde hair and red eyes, and a unique name. She also remembered that the boy grew up with a single mom who owned a bar. After a while, he ran away to an orphanage. The Marquis de Fron took him in during the winter. He also studied at the Crown Academy based on the book. When Lydia came of age, he returned. Urena also remembered that Lydia had left Kion with his good character and chose a crown prince who was a real despot. But she remembered little about him. But now, in the present moment, Urena wondered how such a cocky guy could be so friendly and kind. She looked at Kion at the fitting and noted that he needed to eat better. She continued to tease the young man. She said that he said he was 2 years older than her, but they were the same height. She also added that the clothes he was trying on were worn by her brother Lix at the age of 10. Kion could not stand it and started screaming that soon he would be very tall and her neck would hurt when she addressed him. The assistants began to calm him down. Urena asked him in disbelief why he was so sure. The boy replied that his father was tall and he looked like him. The girl liked to make him nervous, so she asked if his mother had told him about it. The poor young man looked very upset. He said that his father, who was really tall, had told him so. The young lady looked confused. The young man's story did not fit well in her head. Suddenly, a servant came into the room and addressed the lady. Jarina noticed that the housekeeping assistants were not very fond of Reynard, even though they had promised the Marquis. He talks to her quite freely. The fact that Kion was able to behave like that on the estate was all thanks to the Marquis, or rather, thanks to his promises. Jarina thought that she had managed to convince the Marquis that Reynard would not be able to be friends with the workers. But in response, the Marquis set his own conditions. The father wanted their young guest to learn all the rules of etiquette. The boy was bored with this training. Jarina remembered the second condition. It consisted of the fact that Ray had to behave politely in public, not forgetting aristocratic manners. He also had to respect not only the Marquis and Marquise, but also their older sons, who were currently studying at the academy. The heroine thought that she wanted to ask him to do this. However, Robert still ignores him as a guest. She saw that the butler flatly refused to contact Ray. She approached him and wanted to understand why he was being so cold to the boy. Robert interrupted Jarina and told her that Mr. Dave was calling her. She replied that she understood and asked if they had finished taking measurements for the clothes. The worker replied that she was done with that, but now she had to choose the design and material of the clothes. Reynard asked nervously if it wasn't over yet. Jarina explained to him that the clothes were quite complicated. The tired young man replied unhappily that he had spent a lot of time trying on clothes and didn't understand why he needed more. Jarina calmly repeated that now they needed to choose the design and colors of the clothes. Jarina wondered aloud if Ray might be tired by now. She added that they still needed to find shoes and other accessories to complete the outfit. Ray replied that he didn't care and didn't know anything. The girl also lost her temper because of the guy's behavior. She shouted at him to sit up straight. She also added that they had accepted him officially, so he had to follow all the rules of the Cardia family and not spoil their reputation. Reynard was really upset. He shouted that he didn't want to learn what kind of fork to use because Jarina's life was so boring. The lady replied that he had started arguing too early and that he still had so much to learn. The boy continued to whine. He didn't understand why everyone said that the colors were different. Everything looked the same to him. Jarina confirmed that they were indeed different. She advised him to continue choosing a design, and she had to meet with her father. Frightened, Reynard asked Jarina to visit her father later and not to leave him. The girl noticed that he was still afraid and worried. The heroine said that she still had to go because her father and Dave were waiting for her. She also reminded him that Robert was there to help him with everything. Reynard took this into account, but he hardly calmed down. Finally, she asked Robert to be attentive to Ray. He nodded affirmatively. Jarina shouted that she would be back soon. The young man agreed in disbelief. The girl came to her father's office. Dave told her that there were only 2 ways to get into the academy. The first is to pass an exam, and the second, according to the man, is to enter on a letter of recommendation. He continued that if he chose the second option, he would have to go through an interview to test his abilities. Dave added that it is still better to enter through exams. The use of letters of recommendation has become more difficult, as there have been more cases of people trying to get into the academy without the necessary magical features. His father tried to argue that the exam was not only for magic, but also for general subjects, so he asked if he would be able to enter in the spring. Jarina also realized that the entrance exams to the Crown Academy are held in the spring, so there was not much time left. She reasoned that he should enroll there next spring under any circumstances. She knew that the academy takes 7 years to complete. There are those who graduate even later, but there are no cases of early graduation. She also remembered from the book's plot that Jarina and Lydia would meet as candidates for the Crown Princess, and this would happen when the heroine reaches the age of majority. All the circumstances show that they have no chance of not meeting. That's why Reynard has to enter the academy and protect Jarina in 8 years. After analyzing all the factors, Jarina told her father not to worry. She added that Ray was a talented enough boy and had every chance of getting in with a letter of recommendation. The heroine thought to herself that, as far as she understood, only magical abilities would be taken into account at the interview, although properly drawn-up documents also solve a lot. His father reasoned that if Dave wanted him to be his student, then he was really talented. But at the same time, he doubted that one letter of recommendation would be enough. Dave coughed and said he had something to say. He said with a sly smile that he was very influential among the magicians. So if Ray said that he had studied with him, it would be good for his reputation. He also added that if he mentioned that the Cardia family supported him, he would be the talk of the town. Jarina, listening intently to Dave, noted that he looked a lot like Reynard now. The heroine reassured herself that Ray had every opportunity to enter the Kron Academy. After all, her brothers had done the same. Unfortunately, she didn't remember very well how Kion came to get the book. The heroine mentally began to identify the book's events with reality. Kion managed to get in with a letter of recommendation from the Marquis of Defron. Dave also needs to write a letter as good as the one from the Marquis. Jarina pushed her worries aside, recognizing that Dave was indeed a professional magician, with Mr. Cardia himself behind him. It was a different situation now, of course, but Ray had every chance of getting into the academy. Dave happily told them not to worry about Renard's training. He promised to find more reputable people to sign the letter as well. Jarina replied that she did not feel comfortable asking him to do this. The man replied that if it was the lady's wish, he would gladly fulfill it. But he also intends to do it for the gifted Ray. The girl admitted that she thought Dave would deliberately delay the admission process so that he could teach Ray himself. The man also admitted that he had such thoughts. But at the same time, he realizes that he cannot waste time, because it will be too late to enter the university at the age of 12. The young lady slyly informed him that, according to Reynard himself, he would soon turn 13. Dave was surprised and concluded that it was all the more reason to prepare him for admission as soon as possible. Jarina was happy that everything was going so well thanks to Dave. Even the Marquis stopped doubting the boy. The heroine thought that everything was going well when she heard something fall to the floor and break. She did not immediately realize what had happened and even cursed. Jarina and the maid stood outside the closed door of the room, behind which the strange sounds were heard. She turned to her assistant, Betty, and demanded to know what was going on. Jarina clarified that she wanted detailed explanations. Betty began her story. She said that when the lady left, Reynard was afraid of her and Mrs. Lauren, but that everything was fine. Mrs. Lauren showed the young man fabric samples and colors. There seemed to be no problem. But there was one thing, Betty continued excitedly. The fact was that something happened when Mrs. Lauren was picking out the hat. Then the frightened girl fell silent. Jarina demanded to continue the story and didn't understand why Betty had stopped talking. The maid took a long time to find her words. Finally, she said that Mrs. Lauren had said something to Reynard. Jarina was surprised. Betty said that the older woman had pointed out his red eyes and told him to hide them if he went outside the estate. The heroine started screaming. She was really angry and said that she had warned Robert and the others that she would punish anyone who dared to talk about his red eyes. At the same time, Jarina knew in her heart that this was not a surprise to her. After all, she perceives his eyes as hope, but others do not think so. Everyone sees in his eyes only a sense of fear of something unknown. In the Empire, the color red was never considered a bad omen. But still, red eyes were identified with a curse. Jarina recalled that she had deliberately warned Robert about Ray's peculiarity in advance. That's why it wasn't blown out of proportion at the estate. The lady then asked if Robert had made any remarks to Mrs. Lauren. Betty replied that there was no remark, but that the butler had warned everyone was undeniable. At the same time, Betty tensed up and began to tell the whole truth about the situation. It turns out that Mrs. Lorraine told Reynard that he should be grateful to the Cardia family for taking in a bad boy like him. She said that the young lady must have a big heart to do such a thing. The woman said she would never have sewn clothes for such a sinister little boy if she had not been asked to do so by the respected Cardia family. The last straw was when Mrs. Lorraine said that it was unpleasant and dangerous to even be around him. Reynard instantly recalled his life in the orphanage, namely how the other children treated him, how they disliked and shunned him. The guy's eyes were filled with horror, but he could not contain himself and his anger. Bethy said they intervened right away. But Mrs. Lorraine's arm was injured, so Robert took her to the doctor right away. She added that Lorraine acted like a real vixen and held her head high. She reassured herself that she was doing it all for the Cardia family. Jarina did not like this story. She looked sternly at the worker and asked her if they had all just left the room while Reynard was rebelling. The girl nodded affirmatively. The lady was very upset about the situation. After all, after she had taken the boy from the orphanage, she wanted to show him a better, carefree life. Jarina was disgusted with Mrs. Lorraine. She thought she was strong and was fighting with the weak, when in fact it was the other way around. She felt bad at the thought of what Renard must have felt when he heard such malicious remarks about him. The young mistress gave orders that as soon as Mrs. Lorraine was examined by a doctor, she was to be brought here immediately. Betty pointed out that this could be dangerous. Urena began knocking on the door of the room where Renard was staying and warned him that she wanted to come in. The girl started to enter, but heard a shout that it was forbidden to approach. A vase was thrown directly at Urena, but fell next to her and broke. Then she saw poor Renard crouching on the couch. She turned to him. He sat there, not moving, and didn't even look up at the girl. He felt so bad at that moment. Urena was still very upset. She wondered what she should do about Ray and Mrs. Lorraine. She decided that she would definitely make the woman pay for what she had done, even though in a different situation, she would have just yelled at her. She was ready to take Ray's wrath on herself. The girl also understood the boy's resentment. He was angry that she had left him alone and humiliated him in such a way. She thought she had to apologize to him and reassure him. So she called him and told him that she was very sorry for coming too late. Urena didn't understand why Ray was shaking all the time. She promised him that she would punish Mrs. Lorraine for treating him like that. She continued talking to the young man when she saw that he finally looked up at her. The girl saw his tears and asked him excitedly what was wrong with his eyes. He screamed in fright that she shouldn't look. Reynard yelled at Urena for lying to him. He shouted that his red eyes were not a blessing from the goddess. He accused the girl of telling him that she was telling him about his superpowers. Urena felt anxious. She did not know what to do with him because he was not even 13 yet. The young lady was mentally grieving that he had not received love from his parents in his life, and that strangers were mocking him because of his red eyes. The young magician painfully informed her that she was the only one who believed in his special abilities. Jurena's ears echoed with Ray's desperate words that she was the only one who believed in him. She mentally began to justify herself to herself. She reminded herself that she was just in an unfamiliar place, all alone, trying to escape. She also admitted to herself that she was using Reynard, but she didn't think about his feelings at all at the time. She was so ashamed that she admitted that she was almost no different from Mrs. Lorraine. Urena regretted that she could not tell Ray the whole truth, which was that he was definitely blessed by the goddess and that his red eyes were her symbol. She knew for sure that he would become the kindest and most wonderful person in the world. The girl took the young man's hand and said that it was all her fault. She kept apologizing, but Ray couldn't say a word. Finally, he looked at the vase he had broken and said that everything here was so unfamiliar to him, and everyone looked at him as if he were a stranger. Urena agreed with him and apologized once again. The landlady promised that she would personally punish Mrs. Lorraine and make sure that no one else would allow this to happen. She advised the young man that if anyone dared to look at him with defiance, he should accept it with pride. After all, she said, if they allow him to be treated like that, they don't respect the young lady either. She also added that his eyes were extremely beautiful. Urena compared them to rubies and explained that they are red gemstones. That's why his eyes look so much like them. The girl noticed that she liked the way he looked at her without any hesitation.